Leonardo DiCaprio. To millions, he will always be Jack Dawson, the young dreamer on the bow of the Titanic, arms stretched wide, immortalized in one of cinema's most unforgettable images. But behind that eternal moment lies a story far more complicated. For more than 30 years, Leonardo has given us performances that didn't just entertain, they pierced the heart. From the fragile innocence of What's Eating Gilbert Grape to the ruthless ambition of the Wolf of Wall Street, he became more than a movie star. He became a monument to the craft of acting itself. And yet, greatness never shielded him from pain. Behind the fame, behind the triumphs, there are wounds the cameras never caught. Now, at 50 years old, the world's golden boy faces a question no award can answer. What happens when the applause fades, and all that's left is the silence? Behind the immortal smile that once lit up the bow of the Titanic lies a truth far more delicate. Leonardo DiCaprio became the face of hope, romance, and eternal youth. But away from the cameras, his story has always been stitched with fractures. That smile, the one that seemed to promise the world, wasn't just charm, it was survival. Even as millions fell in love with his image, Leonardo himself carried scars carved long before fame found him. He had learned too early that joy could vanish in an instant, that a home could split apart, and that even love could break before it ever had the chance to last. The world saw a heartthrob. What it didn't see was a man quietly battling the weight of memories that never made it onto the silver screen. Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio entered the world on the 11th of November, 1974, in Los Angeles, California. From the very beginning, his life seemed marked by both brilliance and shadow. His mother, Irmelin, a determined legal secretary of German heritage, once stood in a quiet Italian museum before a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. It was in that moment, gazing at the work of a genius, that she felt her unborn child kick for the first time. It felt like fate had spoken. This boy was destined to live a life touched by art, imagination, and perhaps greatness itself. But fate, as Leonardo would learn, is never simple. Before his second birthday, the fragile security of family crumbled. His parents' marriage dissolved, leaving young Leo to grow up straddling two homes, two worlds, and an early understanding that life, even at its beginning, could break apart without warning. By late 1975, Leonardo was barely a year old when his family shattered. His father, George DiCaprio, a charismatic underground comic book artist, had fallen in love with someone else. The marriage ended, but George refused to vanish from his son's life. Instead, the family built a fragile compromise, two separate homes connected by a shared garden. For little Leo, that garden became the bridge between two worlds. In one house, he held his mother's hand as they walked along cracked sidewalks, her quiet strength guiding him through uncertainty. In the other, he was his father's son, mesmerized by the presence of Adam Ferrar, a stepbrother by circumstance but a hero in his young heart. It was an attempt to keep love alive after loss, but the reality was unstable. Leonardo grew up walking back and forth across that garden, learning far too young that family could exist in fragments and that even in closeness, separation could still linger like a shadow. Los Angeles in the late 1972nd and early 82nd was no glamorous postcard. For Leonardo, childhood meant living in neighborhoods where graffiti scarred the walls, sirens cut through the night, and danger hummed constantly in the background. It wasn't the Hollywood dream, it was survival. Even as a boy of 6 or 7, Leonardo sensed the weight of his environment. He later admitted that you learn to keep your head down, to watch everything, to stay alert, and to dream of somewhere far away. Those restless streets pressed their marks deep into his soul. They didn't just shape his childhood, they carved out the intensity that would later define his performances. In that world, silence could be protection, and a smile could be a mask. Long before the world adored him, Leonardo was already learning how to play roles just to get through another day. School offered no escape for Leonardo. At the Los Angeles Center for Enriched Studies, and later John Marshall High School, he felt trapped inside beige walls and the flickering buzz of fluorescent lights. While other kids seemed to fit in effortlessly, Leonardo carried the restlessness of a boy who had already lived too many fractures at home. "I hated public school with a passion," he admitted years later. But behind that blunt confession was the loneliness of a child who never felt like he truly belonged anywhere. Moving between two houses, watching his mother work tirelessly to hold life together, he grew up with a constant sense that nothing was permanent, that everything could be taken away. Those lessons left their mark. By his early teens, Leonardo had already built an invisible armor, a guarded intensity that made him seem older than his years. School couldn't hold him, because the world outside had already taught him harder truths than any classroom ever could. Even the smile that would one day capture millions began not as joy, but as survival. For young Leonardo, that grin was a shield, an invitation to the world to come closer, but never close enough to touch what he kept hidden. Behind it lived the silence of a boy who already knew how fragile life could be. By the age of 10, he could sense arguments before they began, read tension in a room, and understand that nothing in life was guaranteed to last. Each of these moments carved a weight into his character, teaching him to hold back parts of himself even as he seemed open to everyone around him. That duality, light on the surface, shadows underneath, would later become the essence of his acting. But at the time, it was simply how he survived being a child in a world that already felt unpredictable and unstable. Through all the instability, Leonardo was never without love. His mother, Irmelin, became his anchor. She worked tirelessly, driving him across the sprawling city for auditions, planting in him the belief that dreams, no matter how far-fetched, were worth chasing. She gave him structure, discipline, and a reminder that even in a fractured home, devotion could still be unshakable. His father, George, gave him something very different: imagination. He filled Leonardo's world with books, art, and counterculture, showing him that life was much bigger than the narrow streets of Los Feliz. From George, Leonardo learned curiosity and the strange beauty of seeing the world through unconventional eyes. Together, these two forces, his mother's stability and his father's wild creativity, became the twin engines driving him forward. They didn't just raise a boy, they forged an artist. And though the world wouldn't realize it yet, Leonardo was already carrying within him the hunger to transform pain into purpose. From the very beginning, it seemed Leonardo was drawn to the stage. At just 2 years old, he wandered onto a festival platform, his tiny steps unsteady but his spirit completely fearless. The audience erupted with laughter and applause, not at him, but with him. That moment, he later recalled, felt electric, like he had touched something larger than himself. By the age of 10, another spark flickered when he fell in love with breakdancing during a family trip to Germany. He even placed second in a local competition, imagining for a brief moment that maybe the dance floor, not the screen, could be his future. But no matter the outlet, whether a stage, a dance floor, or simply a room full of strangers, Leonardo carried inside him the same burning energy, the need to connect, to express, to turn his restless spirit into something unforgettable. It was a gift he couldn't contain, and soon it would lead him toward his true calling. Leonardo's first real brush with the entertainment industry came around 1980 on the children's program Romper Room. He was just 6 years old, bursting with energy, believing that his boundless enthusiasm was his gift. But the producers didn't see it that way. They called him too disruptive, too much, and eventually removed him from the show. For a little boy who dreamed of performing, it was a rejection that stung deeply. "It was my first no," he would later recall, "and it hurt more than I thought it would." But even in that painful moment, a seed was planted. Leonardo realized that the world wouldn't always welcome his spirit, but he also understood something more important. He could never allow anyone else to silence it. That first no didn't close a door. It became a badge of defiance, fueling the restless fire that would carry him forward through every obstacle still to come. Between 1988 and 1990, Leonardo endured a trial that would have broken most kids his age. For 18 long months, he and his mother knocked on doors across Los Angeles, chasing auditions that almost always ended the same way, with a polite smile, a thank you, and no call back. One agent even suggested he change his name to something more American, like Lenny Williams. To them, DiCaprio was too foreign, too difficult, a name that didn't belong on billboards. But Leonardo refused. With his father's encouragement, he chose authenticity over convenience, even if it meant climbing a steeper, lonelier path. Every rejection carved deeper into his resolve. Instead of giving up, he built grit, learning the hardest lesson of the business. Sometimes the only way forward is to keep knocking, even when your knuckles bleed. At last, the persistence began to pay off. By the age of 14, Leonardo started landing small commercial roles, tiny victories that meant everything after so many closed doors. He appeared in ads for Matchbox cars, Kraft singles, Apple Jacks, and Bubble Yum. In total, he filmed around 20 commercials, each one a miniature classroom, teaching him the mechanics of performance. He learned how to find the camera, how to hold a smile through exhaustion, how to project confidence even when he was nervous. These weren't glamorous jobs. The lights were hot, the hours were long, and the pay was modest. But for Leonardo, every spot was another step closer to the dream. These commercials may have seemed insignificant to the world, but to him, they were proof that the door hadn't slammed shut completely, that maybe, just maybe, he had a place in this world after all. By the late 82nd, Leonardo began to edge closer to real acting opportunities. In 1989, he appeared on The New Lassie, followed by a role in the soap opera Santa Barbara in 1990. They were small parts, but they gave him something invaluable: experience. Then came a bigger break on the television series Parenthood. On that set, Leonardo's restless energy found focus. He studied performances obsessively, especially River Phoenix's portrayal from the film version. He replayed scenes in his head until the emotions felt etched under his skin. Not all the gigs were glamorous. At one point, he even appeared on the game show Fun House, where he caught fish with his teeth for the camera. "You do what you have to do," he later said, "because the alternative is disappearing." Still, each step, no matter how strange, was progress, and by his mid-teens, Hollywood was starting to take notice of the boy who refused to quit. In 1991, at just 17 years old, Leonardo landed his first film role in Critters 3, a low-budget horror comedy about alien creatures devouring anything in their path. Years later, he would laugh about it, calling it possibly one of the worst films I've ever done. But at the time, it was monumental. It was his entry into cinema, the gateway that proved he belonged on a movie set. Just 2 years later, everything changed. In 1993, he was cast in This Boy's Life, opposite Robert De Niro. The film was a brutal coming-of-age drama, and the young DiCaprio played Tobias Wolff, a teenager navigating abuse and survival. Acting alongside De Niro, Leonardo learned lessons that would define his craft. "He taught me to listen," DiCaprio recalled, "not just to my lines, but to the space between them." The same year, he delivered a performance that would shake Hollywood: Arnie Grape in What's Eating Gilbert Grape. At just 19, he disappeared so completely into the role of a boy with a developmental disability that audiences forgot they were watching an actor. That role earned him his first Academy Award nomination, a surreal moment he described as feeling like being invited to a table you never thought you'd sit at. The role of Arnie Grape in What's Eating Gilbert Grape wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. At 19, Leonardo didn't simply play a character, he vanished inside of him. Every gesture, every word, every glance carried such authenticity that audiences and critics alike questioned how someone so young could channel something so raw. The Academy recognized it too, nominating him for Best Supporting Actor. It was his first brush with Hollywood's highest honor, and it instantly set him apart from his peers. He wasn't just a promising young face, he was a serious actor, capable of depth beyond his years. That nomination was the spark that lit a fire under his career. Suddenly, doors that had once been locked tight began to open, and with them came the chance to choose roles that would define an era. By 1996, Leonardo DiCaprio was no longer Hollywood's best-kept secret, he was becoming its brightest star. In Baz Luhrmann's electrifying retelling of Romeo plus Juliet, he embodied Romeo Montague with a mix of vulnerability and burning passion that made Shakespeare feel alive for a new generation. His face was on posters, his voice echoed through classrooms, and suddenly, every teenager in the world knew his name. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what came next. In 1997, Titanic set sail. At just 22 years old, Leonardo became Jack Dawson, the penniless dreamer whose outstretched arms on the ship's bow became one of the most immortal images in cinema history. The film shattered box office records, claimed 11 Oscars, and transformed him into a global icon. Overnight, he went from a rising actor to the most recognizable face on the planet. "One day I was just an actor," he later said. "The next, I couldn't walk down the street." But with fame came storms that would test him in ways the world never saw. Titanic didn't just make Leonardo DiCaprio famous, it made him a phenomenon. Overnight, he became the ultimate heartthrob, his face plastered across bedroom walls, his every move followed by screaming crowds and relentless paparazzi. To the world, he was Jack Dawson forever, the romantic dreamer who would never let go. But to Leonardo, the label was a prison. The tidal wave of fame threatened to swallow the very thing he valued most: his freedom as an actor. Roles flooded in, but many were just variations of Jack, the charming lover, the pretty face. He feared being trapped in a single moment of youth, unable to grow beyond it. So he did the unthinkable. At the very height of his popularity, when Hollywood was ready to crown him as its golden boy, Leonardo stepped away. He turned his back on the easy path, retreating from the spotlight to protect himself from being typecast forever. In Hollywood, absence can be the kiss of death. For Leonardo, it was survival. When Leonardo returned to the screen in the early 2000s, he did it on his own terms, and with a vengeance. In 2002, he reintroduced himself to Hollywood with two radically different roles. In Steven Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can, he was all charm and quicksilver wit as Frank Abagnale Jr., a con artist dancing circles around Tom Hanks's FBI agent. That same year, in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, he transformed into Amsterdam Valen, a young man fueled by vengeance, going toe-to-toe with the ferocious Daniel Day-Lewis. These weren't safe choices, they were declarations. Leonardo DiCaprio was no longer just the pretty face from Titanic. He was an actor of range, grit, and fearlessness. And his collaboration with Scorsese would grow into one of the most defining partnerships in modern cinema. By the end of that decade, Leonardo had completely shed the heartthrob label. He had burned it down and rebuilt himself as one of the most serious actors of his generation. Through the 2002, Leonardo DiCaprio became a chameleon, vanishing into roles that pushed him to the very edge of his craft. In The Aviator, 2004, he embodied the obsessive genius of Howard Hughes, capturing every twitch, tremor, and descent into madness with haunting precision. Critics didn't just see an actor, they saw Hughes reborn on screen. 2 years later, in Blood Diamond, 2006, he carried the weight of moral conflict across his face, torn between greed and conscience in the brutal diamond trade of Sierra Leone. That same year, in The Departed, he lived on a knife's edge as an undercover cop trapped between two worlds, his paranoia and desperation etched into every glance. In Revolutionary Road, 2008, he reunited with Kate Winslet, but this time, their love story wasn't about a sinking ship. It was about a marriage drowning in silence and resentment, their once bright dreams slowly suffocating behind closed doors. Each performance proved that DiCaprio wasn't just chasing fame, he was dismantling it, piece by piece, replacing it with something much rarer: artistic truth. The 2010 second opened with roles that stretched Leonardo DiCaprio even further. In Christopher Nolan's Inception, 2010, He carried the grief of a man haunted by the memory of a lost love, navigating a labyrinth of dreams where reality and sorrow blurred into one. It wasn't just science fiction, it was a study in heartbreak disguised as spectacle. Then came Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, 2012, where Leonardo stunned audiences as the sadistic plantation owner Calvin Candy. With velvet manners masking pure malice, he was terrifying, proving he could disappear into darkness as easily as into innocence. But in 2013, he unleashed something the world had never seen before. As Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street, DiCaprio embodied greed, mania, and dangerous charisma in a performance that was both exhilarating and grotesque. His wild energy electrified the screen, every laugh teetering on the edge of madness. Yet for all these daring roles, one shadow still haunted him, the Oscar that never came. Each year, his name was read among the nominees, and each year, someone else's was called. He smiled, he applauded, but inside, the ache grew heavier. By 2016, Leonardo DiCaprio had spent over 2 decades waiting for the one prize that always slipped through his fingers. Despite delivering powerhouse performances, he had become the symbol of Hollywood's cruelest running joke, the great actor who could never win an Oscar. That year, he took on The Revenant, a role that demanded everything from him. Filming in freezing rivers, braving sub-zero winds, eating raw bison liver, DiCaprio pushed his body and spirit to the breaking point. The performance was raw, nearly wordless, and unrelenting. When his name was finally called for Best Actor, the standing ovation that thundered through the Dolby Theater wasn't just applause, it was history catching up. It was 22 years of heartbreak, frustration, and quiet endurance finally erupting into triumph. It wasn't just an Oscar, one critic said. It was liberation. For Leonardo himself, it was proof that resilience mattered as much as talent. After all the years of waiting, the boy from Los Feliz had finally claimed Hollywood's golden crown. Winning the Oscar should have felt like the final victory, but Leonardo soon realized that even the highest honor couldn't erase the burden of fame. The spotlight that once felt like sunlight now carried a dangerous heat. Every smile became a clue for tabloids to dissect. Every silence became an empty space for rumors to fill. He could no longer walk down the street without eyes on him. Every dinner, every friendship, every fleeting moment of laughter risked becoming tomorrow's headline. Fame had given him everything, and taken away just as much. To survive, Leonardo learned to retreat. He held his life close, guarding the parts of himself that couldn't withstand the endless scrutiny. He wasn't retreating from the world out of fear, but out of necessity. The more the world adored him, the less of himself he could safely give. And so, the Oscar was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new struggle, how to live under a spotlight that never turned off. As the years went on, Leonardo DiCaprio discovered that the battles off-screen could be just as consuming as those in front of the camera. Producing films pulled him into a world of deals and partnerships, where art collided with business and scrutiny followed close behind. Occasionally, headlines tied his name to ventures clouded by controversy, projects where questions about origins or funding became louder than the work itself. Each time, Leonardo responded the only way he knew how, with openness, full cooperation, and a willingness to part with anything that might cast a shadow over the integrity of his career. For him, it was never about guarding an image. It was about protecting the truth of what he had built. Decades of work, sacrifice, and a reputation earned the hard way. If he had to endure rumors, lawsuits, or speculation to keep that truth intact, so be it. Because in the end, Leonardo understood something most never will. Fame can open doors, but it also builds walls. And sometimes, the real fight is keeping yourself whole behind them. For decades, Leonardo's love life has fascinated the public as much as his films. From supermodels to actresses, every relationship became a headline. Every breakup a story. Names like Naomi Campbell, Gisele Bündchen, Bar Refaeli, Blake Lively, and Camila Morrone were splashed across glossy covers, fueling endless speculation about the man behind the icon. But behind the flashes and whispers, there was no scandal, no dramatic betrayals. More often than not, his relationships ended quietly, with distance rather than disaster. One by one, they faded like ships caught in different tides, leaving Leonardo once again on his own. Camilla Morrone endured 5 years at his side, weathering relentless public fixation on their age gap with grace and dignity. Yet, even that love story dissolved into silence. More recently, he's been seen with model Vittoria Soretti, but still, marriage has never come. At 50, Leonardo has admitted to one unfulfilled hope, the dream of becoming a father. It is the one role he has never played, the one longing that lingers, unspoken, in the quiet spaces of his life. At 50, Leonardo DiCaprio stands as one of the most celebrated actors of his generation, a man with an Oscar, global acclaim, immense wealth, and a body of work that has reshaped modern cinema. His legacy is undeniable, a gallery of roles that pushed boundaries, inspired audiences, and proved that artistry could triumph over easy fame. And yet, when the red carpets fade and the lights dim, what remains is not a Hollywood script neatly tied together. It is a mosaic of brilliance and loneliness, of thunderous applause and silent rooms. The houses may be filled with treasures, the garages with rare cars, the walls with art, but when the door closes, the echoes belong to him alone. The boy who once walked back and forth across a small garden in Los Feliz now walks between two worlds, one of noise, where he gives everything to the roles that define him, and one of quiet, where he keeps what little he can for himself. Leonardo's story at 50 is not finished. It is still unfolding. And perhaps that's what makes it resonate so deeply. Because behind the legend is a man still searching for something the spotlight can never give. A love that stays, a family to call his own, and a peace untouched by fame.